Today's topic is breaking down silos. I think many of you signed up for this because this is a huge problem, obviously, in onboarding. It also is a huge problem in complex sales, and I'll allude to this later. Our platform is heavily used in complex sales because that's a lot of times where definition starts for onboarding, that last 30% of the sale. We have some resources on the website related to that. We're also doing another webinar later in this month. I'll allude to it at the bottom, but it also, if you're having challenges more upstream, basically during the sales process, of poor definition or poor data collection, those types of things, we help a ton in that, because for us, onboarding really starts at the last 30% of the sales, specifically in tech sales or PS, professional services, and other groups. And so it starts there, and then it kind of goes through the entire process of the handoff, onboarding, et cetera. Today, we're ISOing obviously the silos, but there are silos everywhere, including during the sales process. So I will allude to that here a little bit at the end. But again, today we're focused on a common challenge that, um, like I said, I'm 48. This has really metastasized quite a bit in the last 10 years, where teams are more spread out, or there are just so many more people obviously involved on both sides of the deployment. So not only your team, you might have anywhere from 3 to 5 people involved in the onboarding, but then on the client side, 5 to 10, right? And so it really has multiplied out, and you need people for certain amounts of time too. So it might be some people at the beginning, then some people who are different in the middle, and then some different people at the end. And then you have some transient people who just need to come real quick, help out, and then get the hell out of the way in a very nice way, right? So we'll call that transactional. So we're going to kind of bust through some of this with respect on our webinars. There's people who are OGs that have been doing onboarding forever, and then there's some people who obviously are new to the hustle, and so they're learning. So sometimes I'll start with some kind of definitional and kind of get us kind of rolling, and then from there we're gonna get into some more of the meat with the potatoes. So you can skip ahead if some of the stuff is too common for you. So again, breaking down silos. Silos, not grain bins. So anybody who's in an ag state knows the difference of a silo and a grain bin. We're based out of Lincoln, Nebraska, Omaha. So this is a very big conversation within the office. So some of you, I believe, are chuckling right now because you know what I'm saying. So, all right, well, let's get into it. So what do silos look like? So some of this is definitional, as I mentioned. A lot of crap on this slide too. I apologize, but it just didn't warrant 2 slides. But you guys can kind of make your way through. So sometimes you're kind of wondering, where do silos come from, and how is it affecting basically your organization overall? So you get a lot of these symptoms, and silos typically are the reasons behind this, and there are other factors which I'll cover here in a minute. But if you're frustrated right now on a disjointed process because it starts stop, or there's other issues kind of going on there, um, lack of communication and visibility, there's always these hangups and or delays, you're going to start to figure out this is probably because you're needing input and feedback from multiple people, right? And so that again is a symptom of what we would be calling silos. Obviously, people are in their own worlds. They don't really know what's going on in between. This can cause some substantial problems internally for your own group. And then, of course, the same exact problem is duplicated in the client that you're onboarding, right? And so that's an important piece of this. It's not just a blame game that there are silos on the customer side, like that famous horror movie, the enemy is inside the house, right? And so sometimes you got to be careful of that also. So you got internal silos and you have external silos. And maybe in your use case, you already know which side is the bigger problem. But just something to, again, consider. Open your eyes to it. We like to talk about Johari windows all the time in our own enterprise, and sometimes that's the stuff that you don't see. Well, maybe some of that is a symptom on your side. Another big thing we're seeing, especially if you're like, we work with a lot of clients in like regulated industries, healthcare, finance, technology, professional services, this kind of stuff. In all of those ecosystems, there's a lot of data that has to be used during the onboarding process, and just lots of things have to be approved, and there's processes if you're doing installs and people have to go on prem. I mean, the list goes on and on. We work with a lot of clients that have multiple locations, right? So there's just poor information flow. And it's the classic, if you do a huddle call, you realize half of the people have no idea what's going on. That's a big problem, right? So there's just a lot of data, and who needs to see what and who needs to be doing what with the data also can be very problematic. And I'll just, a simple use case of this kind of stuff is, let's say you ask the client to fill out a template or some sort of file, right? And they submit it back to you. Well, a lot of times that just sits there and no one really looks at it, and then all of a sudden when it's needed, you open it and it's gigo, it's garbage in, garbage out, it's a bunch of junk, right? And so that's just poor flow, because that should have been reviewed 3 weeks earlier, so it's not holding things up. But who is supposed to review that? And does the person reviewing it, do they know what the expectations are or definition of done, right? And so you can kind of see this information flow, whether it's documents, data collection, files, whatever it is, there needs to be consistency of that. If it's just ad hoc, or if you're doing this through email, email is not a process, right? So again, with the silos, this becomes even greater problems, because who owns what, when, where, and you typically are needing to aggregate a lot of data and information to properly get this, and that can start as early as the handoff process, right? And then in that silo would be your sales team. Again, not calling out sales, but obviously that's where a silo can come from, right? Is your sales team silo, or the handoff silo, or internal resources silo, and then of course in the client side. So there can be many silos. Um, Conflicting goals. This is sometimes a friction point, whether it's just with sales and or with the actual client as you're onboarding them, because when you're onboarding, having clear expectations of the client so that they can set expectations internally to their own teams, aka their own silos, becomes a very big challenge a lot of times. So on your side, let's just say it's hip hip hooray, like we landed this new hospital and they're going to onboard our platform or our hardware or whatever it is, or a manufacturing company. Everybody's like hip hip hooray. And then all of a sudden that was bought by leadership of your client. And now all of a sudden it gets into the onboarding process, and the people like, we're like slammed. We have quarterly goals already. We have a lot of things in place. Like, we are overwhelmed almost already. And now we're adding this onboarding. And if you're not teeing them up correctly to communicate and collaborate and get everything needed correctly within their own silos, the chances of that onboarding going successfully is very slim, right? And so you have these conflicting goals, and a lot of that has to come to with transparency, right? And then technology gaps. We'll get into that a little bit more, but this becomes even more problematic where Peter and Paul don't play well together, right? And some other things around that. So how do you provide an optimal environment to do this? So some of this is kind of symptom, Eastern Western medicine, right? Just don't take pain pills to cover the pain, figure out what the root problem is. So some of these are for you to kind of revisionist, kind of go back through your onboarding processes and think about, are these popping up a lot? Well, probably a lot of that is because of silos and challenges. So why is this so important? You say, Joey, great, I signed up for this webinar. Why does this matter? Well, I think there's some pretty big things here, right? Because we've built a very successful product and company around these problems, and because they're real. And so delays, clearly miscommunication, all sorts of things we have done. Excuse me, allergies right now. I don't know if it's an allergy or a cold, but we're going to play through it. But ultimately, miscommunication on a lot of these steps can obviously elongate onboarding processes. We have done many webinars and have resources on our site related to metrics to better measure your team's performance and quantifying that to dollar value, so you can justify your team, bonuses, expansion of your team, really celebrate the great work that you guys do. There's a lot of metrics that you should be using around that. And so you need to be measuring that. One of those clearly is time to value, clearly, right? And other things. So every time there are delays, this is impacting your team's performance, your ability to scale. The list goes on and on, right? Dissatisfaction and potential churn. A good 15% of churn comes during the onboarding process. Yes, that is true. Do the math. Every time I talk to one of you privately, not in a group setting, and I tell you if the onboarding was an atrocious onboarding, right? How often do they actually do you if you had 100 clients, do 15 of them not renew? You're like, oh hell yeah, they don't renew. Right, because the relationship, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. That's kind of real in dating and of course in onboarding. Don't know, but it's definitely in onboarding. Maybe in dating it's a little bit different. But ultimately, right, you guys know what I'm talking about. Inconsistent experience. So here's where it gets fun. So either many of you are upsizing, meaning growing. Some of you might even be downsizing to become more efficient. Some of you might be VC backed. Some of you might be a mom and pop shop. Really, the size of our clients doesn't matter. We have clients on all ranging capabilities, but ultimately, no matter what size you are, you want a consistent, measurable experience because that's where areas of improvement can come from because you know what's going on, right? And then as you add people or have to remove people, the experience of your customers during that handoff and onboarding experience is going to be very, very good, right? And then missed opportunities, again, similar. There's a lot of cross-sell, upsell opportunities, but so you can do the math. You know the dollar value of each one of your opportunities and growth areas. This is a big number. It's a huge number, actually. You will be surprised what those numbers are if you actually put the pen to paper and we have resources for you to help do that. So ultimately, we understand kind of the impact basically of the silos on the onboarding. So why is this so challenging, right? So again, I'll reiterate, we won't spend much time on this, but again, just for conceptually, you have your team, right? So your team has just sold the deal and you're now onboarding another team. Now, the multiplier effect here, which I don't have in this visual, but you can obviously make the jump with me, is obviously if the clients are remote, if they have multiple locations, or you're deploying to multiple location, that silo effect obviously just becomes a gigantic problem. So the number of people involved multiplies out very, very quickly. And so you need to address this in a way that obviously is going to make the onboarding more successful. The second piece of this is you need seamless information, right? So again, you have your internal systems, the client has their own internal systems, and then somehow you guys got to get all of this into an equilibrium basically. And there's lots of people and need contributors from many different departments to make this become a reality. So this is where the silos start to multiply out and it gets really hard to kind of keep everything kind of organized there, right? So we've been building block here to getting to the point of understanding silos, helping you identify where those silos might be in your organization. Because if you're selling a software or you're a SaaS client here, one of your big silos is the IT department and security audit of the client you're deploying into. That itself is one just massive silo that you need not only internal people on your team, tech, but then also their side of the equation. That's just a real simple one that it's a massive silo that can stop deals entirely, right? So you need to think about where are you getting held up? What are the potential silos within your group? Because what we're going to walk through here is how you need to address those, obviously, to make the onboarding more successful, faster, and obviously more pleasurable, right? So let's get into it. So couple of strategies here, and then I'm going to walk through three specific approaches that have yielded extremely well for helping knocking down these silos and identifying those silos and holding them accountable to this. Because not to be a negative Nancy in the room or a um, negative Ken. Oh, that's yeah, fun fact there. We figured this out actually. So there was like Karens, right? Like create, you know, and then we figured out the opposite of Karens is Ken's, and one of our leaders is Ken. So we've had a lot of fun with it. But he's a really nice guy. But I digress. So Karens and Kens. So how do we basically build a strategy to improve this? I hope some of you are having fun with that. But ultimately, here are the strategies, kind of the underpinning of how you can bust these things down and be more successful. So the first one, clearly a unified strategy. We're going to get into this extensively because again, not to be rude, but if you're managing your onboarding via email, that's not managing, that's hope. And obviously you need a better way to communicate, collaborate in a secure way, right? Because people are sharing important information back and forth. I hope you're not all doing that through email. Lots of stories there. But unified systems, basically, how do you get everybody organized? And then how do you create an environment where it's cross-dependent collaboration, cross-department, say that fast. Again, something to take into extreme consideration here is this is a two-sided situation. You got to have your team organized because if you need additional resources out of your team, IT department, maybe legal, all sorts of folks, you got to organize those cats there, right? And the same thing on the client side, right? Because they need to be organizing things and busting down and getting all the information you need to be successful. The other thing I talked about already a little bit is documented and shared processes. Like you have to set the expectations to clients and the accountability on that. So we've been using the word silos quite a bit, obviously, because that's the title of the webinar, but closely related, blood brother, sister on silos is accountability. And that's really where these things break down. A lot of times we'll use the silos as kind of the excuse, like, oh, there's silos. But what it was is that there wasn't clear expectations and accountability set during the onboarding process. And part of that helps to break down those silos. But a lot of times those silos aren't known because it hasn't been clearly setting the expectation of what is going to be needed at the beginning of the onboarding process, right? So, a fun way we always like to look at things is, look at yourself first. What could I be doing better? And then how do we hold them more accountable on the onboarding side? Well, some of that is setting the right expectations, right? And what we're going to be needing so that we can identify those folks and roles within the enterprise on both sides. And then creating an environment to make that as easy and seamless as possible. So if I do need their help, wherever they are within the enterprise, I'm making it so it's easy for them to get that information and get that to me in a timely manner, right? And that's a real important piece here. The silo busting comes a lot with obviously organizing and setting the right expectations and holding them accountable to that during that. And you'll kind of see as we get into the next two is we want to have a very good experience, but we also have to set the right expectations. And the last one, of course, is ownership. And that's to me is the accountability, right? And so this is all done in a timely manner during the initial stages of the onboarding process to identify where those silos are within the enterprise, because you're going to know we need this information from X, Y, and Z. And then those might be in different departments, different locations, whatever. Being able to identify that in the early stages, but then creating an environment where it's very easy for those individuals to get you the information needed to get this over the line. And again, that's on both sides. That's not only penetrating the client, new customer, but then also on your side. All right. So couple big strategies there, things for you to consider. Obviously, look back at kind of what you're doing now, because again, some of that is going to identify some of the problems to silos. Silos just don't fall automatically. It's a combination of things done in a repeatable, executable, and visible manner. And visible, we're going to talk about here. Again, this is kind of a hint because we've already talking about how to have a repeatable way of doing this so that you know what's going on so you can improve. It's also having visibility to what's going on so that if there are silos, you're busting those or penetrating them faster because you know things are not going the way that you want to sooner, right? And so a lot of it is not everything's going to be perfect. No one's going to preach that every onboarding is going to go seamless and not a single problem and nobody's going to let you down on either side. No, that's false. But you need to create an environment that when it does start to go sideways a little bit, you know it's going sideways, or at least there's a temperament that this thing is going sideways so that you can course correct and make sure things are going all right. All right. So again, think about them. So first one, centralized environment. So again, I alluded to it a little bit. This is the first thing you need to address. So in order to get silos broken down and people on the same page, you have to be operating in a centralized environment. The centralized environment needs to have all of the information, the communication, all the actions that need to have happen in one centralized place. For the love of Pete, this is so that you know what the hell is going on. I mean, this shouldn't be a hard thing to convince you on, right? If you had to go to 19 different platforms for your banking, you'd be like, this is preposterous. It's the same thing, right? So get everything in a common, secure environment so that you know what's going on and you can create repeatable processes around this and visibility so that you can execute your onboarding successfully, right? And little going back up the funnel a little bit, like I've mentioned, our platform is heavily used in that complex sale because a lot of definition happens there because you need that information for a good handoff and then handoff into onboarding. So today we're talking about silos clearly, but as you're thinking about this, you might be going up the chain or up the funnel, whatever way you want to go, up the funnel a little bit because that handoff might be wonky for you right now. And or that last, if you have SMEs and a lot of project definition going on, in that last 20% of the sale because it's getting real, you're going from dating to getting married, like in that ecosystem, you might want to consider some of your onboarding processes to be a little bit further up the funnel. We have a lot of clients that push onboarding into that last 20% of the sale so that it's less riskier at the handoff. And then some of these silo busting things are already addressed because you've built rapport and relationship a little bit sooner in the game. Just something to think about. You can't have your whole team up in that side of the funnel, but again, it's a technique that we have seen work very, very well, especially on very complicated kind of solutions or projects or offerings of that nature. So it isn't so abrupt. I digress a little bit. Back to centralized environment. So as you can see here, again, because most clients are needing to communicate, collect data, do configuration, do discovery, do coaching on how to configure things right. So a lot of our clientele is in that kind of product. If your solution literally is a click, click, boom, dynamite kind of solution, some of these ideas won't make sense to you because there's too much here for a product that simple. That's just a self-serve setup client. We do work with clients like that, but this, what we're talking about here, clearly self-serve does not infer silos. So work with me here on the kind of presentation. This is typically for one of those more complex type of offerings that you might have. So centralized environment, repeatable workflows, access to all this information so people know what the hell's going on. And of course, improved communication and measurement. So just to show you just how to bring these worlds together, I'll just show you, and I'm not saying that's my wife and my child and my dog. That's not what you guys needed. There we go. So what this is this is what we call a workspace environment. Again, you're here because you know this is what we do, right? Like we do this extremely well for tons of clientele. So we have a product, shocker, called Engage, right? And so we help our clients execute the last 20% of the scale, the handoff, and then the onboarding experience. But one of the pieces of that, and I'll talk about it here in a little bit, is like mutual plans, how to guide people and set that role and expectations together. But one of the things that we're very popular for.
Thank goodness I wasn't dying.
Oh, that's good. Whoever that
Thank
was,
goodness I
somebody was
wasn't
not
dying.
dying. That's good. Whoever that is, I'm glad you weren't dying. Um, but back to the workspace here obviously is one centralized. So what these are secure portals between you and your customer. Okay. And so this is an environment where your team and maybe some people from your sales team, maybe SMEs, other people from your implementation team, this is one centralized environment that is shared between both groups. Now you can hide information, of course, but ultimately this is a secure environment to execute certain processes and have visibility across all the data that is being shared, any kind of onboarding processes that you might be doing, but all in one centralized environment so you can communicate, collaborate, comment, ask for feedback, keep everybody in alignment across the entire onboarding experience. Okay. And so these are shared between the teams, highly secure, integrated with CRMs, all sorts of integrations. We'll talk about that later. But ultimately, if you take one thing out of this entire presentation to break down silos, it's called getting everything centralized and having visibility on it. All right. And so we help customers do that, do this at scale. There's templating behind here. So all of this is heavily automated, but ultimately it gets everybody on the same page. So you're talking apples to apples, definition of done, you know what's going on. All right. Very critical part to have all of that centralized in a secure way so that you can guide people to the next steps of that. All right. Just 101. Do it. Right. So centralized environment, critical for a successful onboarding project, because again, you might have literally 20 people involved in this process, right? So it's very, very critical that everything is up to date. It's the newest information. It's the right information, all this stuff. I mentioned it earlier, GIGO, GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. There's some really good resources on the website around that, because that is a huge killer in onboarding, is junk data, or the team implements old data, bad data. And so all sorts of things, you're chuckling to yourself because you know exactly what I'm saying. And so we want to eliminate all of those hiccups there. So next solution is mutual plans. So we alluded in the earlier phases of the strategies to win. The strategies to win basically comes to discipline and execution, right? And holding people accountable. So you saw it a little bit in what I shared a minute ago, but we are very big proponents of mutual plans, if you want to call them that, implementation plans. We don't care what the terminology is, but you want to break down basically the responsibilities during an onboarding process. These can be internal facing only, so the client never sees them, or obviously a lot of them are client facing. And so holding them accountable and walking them through what the expectations are for a successful onboarding. I know some of you might chuckle that when the client was being sold your services, somebody might have told them, you know what, we can onboard you in 3 weeks. And you guys are like, WTF? It takes us 8 weeks at minimum to deploy a client, right? So sometimes there's missed expectations right out the gate too. And so resetting those expectations, resetting again, who has to do what, when, where, and who has to be involved, AKA where the silos are, and setting those clear expectations, right? So you have to have common goals or shared. You need to define, obviously, who the heck is doing what, and agreeing on certain milestones within the onboarding. Clearly, you don't just onboard and say, we're going to do everything all at once. There's kind of breakpoints, right? And areas of opportunity to reconvene and guide people to success, because sometimes there are dependencies, right? But ultimately doing all this in a transparent environment. Why the transparent and the centralization is critical to not only his mutual plans, it's let's call it what it is. It's getting people to get stuff done because other people are seeing that they're not getting stuff done. And this allows you to pull the trigger on getting other people to help with getting things over the line, maybe having to talk to executives. But most of the time, if you deliver these in a way that is holding people accountable, they're going to deliver. They might miss it by a day or two, but ultimately the processes are going to help drive success around these things. All right. So, again, for the silos, I dug into this one a little bit more because it is really critical, and it has to be done in the onset, and it has to be managed and held accountable, and reminders. And of course, our platform does all these automations and workflows to help with all of this stuff to automate this experience. But it ultimately comes down to identifying who has to be involved, setting the right clarity and focus for what they need to do, and then driving all of that in a centralized environment so we know how things are progressing. And so some of these things, obviously, you can take notes and think about in your own process, but ultimately, it's about getting people ultimately across the line by holding them accountable, setting the right expectations, and then gathering that data, confirming it, and then moving on through that process. And again, it's nobody's first rodeo here. This is going to hold true for 80 to maybe 90% of the onboarding items. And then there's going to be that bespoke ad hoc stuff that needs to be done, but that still is also done in that centralized environment so that it's, you can still hold people accountable to that. So there's kind of standard, and then you always got your, your little bit of additional love that might be bespoke or again unique to an integration they need, or a professional services piece of it. Again, all of these things are considered, but it's just setting those expectations and goals there. Okay, so the first one, centralization. Second one, executable, actionable milestones through mutual plans. Again, busting through those silos and holding those people accountable. The last one is integrations and visibility. So what happens a lot of times in silos is the information is needed by uh, a lot of people who you might not even know, or even the people who you're on the phone with doing the onboarding with barely even know themselves. So you have a tremendous amount of contributors, basically people who are just getting data or sending stuff to you. So there's this whole web of needing to collect data and information. And a lot of times those people really aren't actively involved in the onboarding themselves, right? So there's just a ton of people that might have to be providing information. And then of course you need to obviously do something with it on your side. So one of the things that was a huge feature to our platform that we added years ago was we obviously have mutual plans, but then you have a tremendous amount of what we call kind of like guests or contributors. And these are being able to, via our platform, go out and get data and information from other people and bring it all into one spot. And reversely, being able to provide a ton of people information that has been collected externally because they might have to help with the quote or the SMEs or configuration and all these kinds of things. So what I mean by this, the best way to kind of explain this is to just show it is so we have lots of clients obviously that are using like CRMs or other solutions. So just because we use it ourselves, we're a big Salesforce group. Many of our clients are HubSpot also, Team Slack, all of these things we're integrated with. But as a reminder, this is a workspace. So this is client facing. They can be uploading files here, filling out, completing all of these checklist items, all this kind of stuff. We are fully integrated into Salesforce and other solutions where all of that information that is being collected, all of the files, all of the analytics, everything is also in there because your company might have 10 people that need to get access to this information to help with the deployment. And so it makes it seamless from not only the client's perspective on their end, but for your own internal teams that are maybe engineers or other people of your team. They need to get to some information to help successfully deploy this client. They're going and getting that data right in their existing systems that you guys already have. So it's not tool fatigue. There's not another layer. It's basically an environment to make it very seamless to getting to that right information. Again, breaking down silos, not only on the client side, but also on the internal side of the equation. This is really, really critical for adoption, not only in streamlining your own onboarding experience, but on both sides of the equation there, right? Very, very important. This is just a high level example, of course, to drive that. So when we talk about workspace experiences, it's not only process execution, all of that in a centralized environment, but it's also once we get a crap ton of this data, how do we get it to the right people in your company to be successful? They're not getting in to engage. They're just going to your common systems. They're already there, and we're giving you just basically a massive shortcut and speed to getting it successful, right? So it's really, really important. Of course, we have a tremendous amount of reporting also to create all visibility to this, not getting into the, today's not a product demo, but ultimately, this is where it has to be seamless, this kind of experience to bust down those silos. Because if not, the silos just get recreated because stuff is all in these disparate places. You need to get it into a centralized area and get it so that the right people can get to the right information at the right time, meeting them where they want to be met. So making it easier for your team members and of course on the client side, right? And just streamlining all of this so that there's scalability also, because again, every silo we knock down and create visibility means things can happen faster. That means saving you guys time, effort, and energy, and then also making the client extremely happy. Okay, so silos, again, they're everywhere, internal and external, but ultimately the way to break those down is by creating that centralized so everybody can see what's going on. People start to act a lot differently when they can see everything that's going on. Two, holding them accountable via some mechanism. In our case, we like mutual plans in our infrastructure to execute workflows and processes and data collection, right? And then the last is making it seamless so that all of the parties involved can get to the right information at the right time. That's how you start to break down big time silos and which are time killers and obviously where churn lives. Um, I will allude and appreciate everybody's time. As I mentioned at the onset, we have another webinar coming up later on, which is empowering your internal champion in complex sales. This is the exact same kind of conversation of breaking down silos during the sales process and that definition phase, that last 20% of the sale. And then, of course, that handoff. So if you're listening to this and you're not in sales, but you really understood what we were talking about today, this webinar would be for members of your team to think about it from the sales perspective, teeing you up for better success in breaking down those silos during the sales process. So I encourage you to sign up for that webinar because it's a very similar concept in breaking down silos in a complex sale because it's the same exact thing. It's getting all the people on the same page and getting the right information to make deployment correct. So I encourage you to check that out or share with other members of your team. Last but not least, I do this on all, and many of you have taken advantage of this, is one-to-one consultation. So obviously, our site, our resources, you can go out that. I'll share everything out there. But many of you, some of you are on today, not many of you not, but ultimately, I'm one of the leaders. We have obviously a very purpose-built solution, and we've solved a lot of problems for a lot of corporations. Some of you just want brainstorming and ideas. You can email me, and then when I send out the follow-up, there'll be a personal one-on-one. It's not going to be a demo. You can just tell me what you're working against. I can show you how we have solved those problems. Obviously, my intent is to leverage Engage to do that. But if you have other things in place and you're really just looking for some ideas and early bird shopping, don't worry. Don't hesitate. Sign up one-to-one. I'll walk you through some brilliant use cases we have and ideas for all different kind of deployment types, obviously on the onboarding side. And we do that just because rising tide moves all ships, and would love to help out at that. So again, Joey Connect, there's my email right there. Of course, I'll be emailing all of you the video of this or the summary of this, hopefully later tonight, if not tomorrow morning. And please take advantage of that, because again, it's like ships in the ocean. Many of you are not that far off from great success, and where you're looking to scale and trying to create repeatable. So it's a 5 to 10 bubble degree changing on the compass that can really make a big difference in the outcomes. And I've had some of you express like, Joe, or do you only work with like enterprises? No, we work with startups, literally two-person companies. Our pricing structure, super high, or very efficient. We don't charge for any of like that contributor stuff. All of these things are built into the tool to make you successful. So look forward to brainstorming with some of you. And again, appreciate the time today.